Hi, if you know me, you know I'm not a huge fan of RTSs, but they have to be covered too, even if, in this series, we're only talking about the B-listers. Command HQ is one of the earliest iterations of what we'd call now a modern real-time strategy. So, other than the combat only, it also features resources and unit production. There's no base improvements in the game, but for what it is, and in line with its theme being more of a global-scale wargame conflict rather than small, more localized skirmishes, it can be excused and is understandable. It can be enjoyed against another player or CPU at 5 different difficulty levels. Command HQ comes with many included scenarios, but allows for creation of your own custom battles too, so it offers pretty decent replayability, which was not a given in 1990. Interestingly enough, the date the particular scenario starts in is a deciding factor for which units will be available throughout it. It's an unusual mechanic, but it works, so I'm not one to complain. 1918 and prior games only include land and sea units, 1942 and later add planes and carriers, and after 1986, nukes and satellites become available. Additionally, you have to take all usage under consideration and foreign aid is introduced into the gameplay loop too. So, it's best that the newbies would start with the earlier scenarios, gradually adding new mechanics with later dates when they familiarize themselves with the earlier. Command HQ may look simple, but it's surprisingly deep and more than it seems at the first glance, especially that it has a very unusual and definitely unique even to this day feature, allowing you to save the game as a so-called movie file that can be rewatched at a later date within the game's engine. What's best about it though, it can even be stopped at any given moment and restarted from that particular place, as in replayed from that point, which opens up the game for quite a few interesting scenarios of fixing that one little mistake that costed you war, or seeing if a different choice mid-conflict would yield more suitable results. Command HQ is not the best RTS, but it's one fans of the genre should at least give a shot, as it can be very engaging and made in a way that hasn't really been replicated to this very day. Realms is a fantasy real-time strategy graphically similar to the more famous Populous, but conceptually rather different. Story-wise, the game begins with you as a prince, witnessing your father being immolated at the sea, and as you shed a single tear, so as much as a real man is allowed to, saying your last goodbyes, as soon as it falls from your cheek, you're rewarded by the gods with a thundering sign, quite literally, lightning strikes you, forms a serpent at your hand, and an emblem proving that you're the one to rule the world. So, given your rather gloom mood, you decide to do just that, annihilate all others to feel better yourself. There's 6 fantasy-themed races you can play as, and each of them have their own unique attributes, strengths and weaknesses. For instance, elves are naturally amazing archers, while dwarves can do incredible things with axes. There's 10 missions in the game, and they can be attempted in any order, and their objectives don't really change much. All you have to do is conquer all of the cities on the map. Capturing the city requires laying siege to it by sending an army to it. Most cities are naturally defended, and when two armies meet, the battle starts. You can organize armies formations and maneuver them before the battle commences to prepare for them strategically. Battles are battles, but for a city to fall, more must happen. Depending on the grain levels, morale and whether the city has walls, it can take a while for it to be defeated and captured. Well, naturally, capturing is just an option, a city can also be sacked or razed to the ground, for that little crime against humanity touch that most games miss somehow. Interestingly enough, Realms uses money as the main resource for everything, so instead of sending out units to collect stone, wood, gummy bears and magic beans as you would in other games, you tax your cities and then use the money to buy units, obviously only if the city is large enough to be able to raise an army within it. You can spend it to feed your citizens too, to build defensive walls around it, or cultivate the surrounding land. The quality of raised army depends on the city size and number of armies raised in that particular city already, and they can be raw recruits, militia, warriors, and the best of them all, elite warriors. Armies can be equipped with weapons and armor and have to be paid wages. Well-paid army recovers their number fast after battles and has high morale, whereas unpaid or lowly paid one will most likely disband very soon after it was raised. I mean, people don't fight for the rules, ideas, they fight for a hope for a better future or money. The latter in this particular case. Realms is a truly unusual RTS, as other than working on a different inner mechanics than most games in a genre do, also features a gigantic map of 125,000 square miles of fractally generated landscape and possibility to hold and simulate even up to 128 armies with thousands of units each in every single game. If you enjoy the games in a genre, definitely check it out. BattleBugs is an RTS set in the world of insects. They're here, they're there, they're everywhere, such are these pesky creatures. So yeah, interestingly enough, it was made by Epix, a developer I praised more than once when talking about C64 games, sports titles especially, noting that they would always find a way to squeeze everything out of the platform they were working on to deliver prime entertainment. On those where the hardware limitations were not as dramatic by 1994 when the game released, they could focus more on the design and playability rather than combating system's power, or in case of C64, lack thereof. So that's what they did, and we ended up with BattleBugs, unique, incredibly fun game that no one played or even knew about. Sure, I'm exaggerating a little, but for the most part, it sadly never got the time in the limelight it should have. BattleBugs uses its campaign as a perspective to tell a tale of a battle between two rival groups of insects, in and around the house. So, the battlefields they would clash on would be set in the kitchens, living rooms, and backyards to name a few. Warcraft or Command & Conquer in your bedroom. Can you imagine? Yeah, it's fun, and filled with over-the-top humor too. You'll get to lead units of various kinds of insects, all differently looking, animated and having their own unique special skills and usage scenarios. It's worth keeping in mind that the game works on heavily expanded rock-paper-scissors mechanics, meaning each kind of a unit is strong against a specific other and weak against a totally different one. So preparing for a mission and then utilizing them correctly is a key to success. While most of 30 available missions can be won by only either annihilating opposing side entirely or capturing all the food pieces on the battlefield, and by capturing I mean holding the position it's in until it turns to your side by raising the flag, for a lack of a better word. The game doesn't really get stale and is as fun and fresh feeling all the way through as it initially was when you first launch it. But, and that's going to be a huge deterrent for some, those later missions can get really challenging. So if you're not well versed in tactical RTSs, you may get restless and annoyed repeating some of them more than a couple of times. If you don't mind that or are experienced in the genre however, BattleBugs is a gem, give it a go. Across the Rhine is probably the most unusual out of today's games in the genre, as it's not a pure RTS, but one mixed with smidge of simulation. It is set during World War II, depicts conflict between American and German forces and focuses on single tank battles during the Allied invasion of Normandy, which means that it doesn't cover all of the war, but just a slice of it. It may be discouraging to some, not being able to influence the outcome of it in any way, but it is what it is. Across the Rhine comes with 3 built-in campaigns in which you take control of both sides of the conflict. You represent it as a soldier, your in-game alter ego, and depending on your performance during missions, you can get promoted, which in turn will allow you to control more units at the time. While fuel and ammo always has to be taken under consideration when playing, there are no resources or units building in the game, at least not in a way you'd expect from a traditional RTS. Everything is focused on tactical combat and simulation bits if you decide to participate in them, and that's what makes Across the Rhine a unique choice between today's picks. Through most of the game you have access to a tactical and strategical map, where you issue commands to the tanks under your control, assigning waypoints, changing their behavior or giving direct orders. And this, for the most part, kinda works like a box standard RTS, albeit focusing on tanks and much slower, more tactical and realistic feeling. But if you only feel like it, you can jump into any of the tanks and take direct control, and your level of involvement with it is entirely up to you. You may control the tank's movement and a turret all by yourself, like in a real simulator, or leave the control to the computer for it to follow your previously issued movement orders and only focus on shooting and hunting the enemy units. And you know what? It's surprisingly fun when you get a hang of it. Not fun enough to keep you replaying the game for many times on end, but plenty enough fun to complete at least one of the campaigns and not feel tired of it. The one-of-a-kind mix of genres proved an interesting formula that sadly was DOA, as gamers that awaited the release of this little gem expected something entirely different. Either a full-fledged RTS or even more so a simulation first and foremost. And while the scores reflected that disappointment, don't get drawn into them too much, check the game out by yourself, as it's better than it may appear on the first glance, and even more so if you approach it with no overinflated expectations. Polanie is a Polish real-time strategy developed to rival the likes of Warcraft. Can it though? No, it cannot, it's not even close. But don't be discouraged, it's still interesting and worth learning about if you've never heard of it. Its biggest problem, however, other than being a considerably simpler game than Warcraft, was that it only ever released in Polish, Czech and German, and while the rumors of a fan-made English translation called Slavs existed, I've never seen one or spoke to anyone who'd seen it, so I'm inclined to disbelieve the claim. The one I'm playing, cause it's intro in English, but everything else is in Polish. Weird. Still, what is it all about? The year is 699 and you're Mirko, a young Slav prince. After returning home from a successful war, you realize that it's been burned to the ground, pillaged, and the citizens killed. And that's a low blow, someone destroying your hometown when you're away. I mean, it's not fair, not giving you a chance to even defend it. So yeah, you're so angry in fact, that you've not been able to poop for a week after coming back. And that's not healthy. Ask your doctor. So you vowed to avenge it and claim even more land in retaliation. Like all of it, all of the land. Why? Because why not? So you set off to do just that. The game features only one campaign that is composed out of 25 missions. It's not a lot, but also not nothing, and given that if you manage to forget about all of the game's shortcomings, it can actually be enjoyed for a little while. All nations have the same unit types, which is a bit disappointing, but could be argued to be more or less factually correct, if you keep in mind that it's supposed to take place in medieval Poland only. Stricter military units are very expensive to produce, especially those capable of casting magic, so battles often involve only few of these on each side. Fortunately, woodcutters who are used to erect buildings in your town can also double down as axemen if necessary, so there's at least that. The only resource in the game is milk, and it's used to build everything, from buildings through defensive structures and bridges to units. Everything runs on milk, as it used to in Poland back then. I mean, I've not lived long enough to confirm the claim, but it sounds feasible. First it was milk, then kielbasa, and then pierogi. Fact. Anyway, milk is naturally produced by cows that graze the grasslands around your town, eating it like spice harvesters do spice in Dune games. And when they're finally quote-unquote full, they come back to the barn to deliver the milk, so to speak. It's an interesting take on Dune's approach to resources, and despite its simplicity, it's working, so no reason to complain about. Remember the biggest problem I told you about initially, the language barrier? I lied, and I've done it to soften the blow that will come in a minute. The language barrier is non-existent really, as Polanie can easily be played regardless what language it is in, as its mechanics don't stray too far from any other RTS. The real issue it has is different. Namely, it has no support for multiplayer of any kind, and that's travesty. And any RTS player will tell you that while campaigns are fun and all, their favorite games will shine in multiplayer, and that's how they should be enjoyed. And with Polanie, it's impossible. So, approach it at your own discretion, and only if you really need to sample all of the games in the genre, as otherwise it may prove to be a tad disappointing. Oh, and before I forget, the CD-ROM version was released a little bit after the floppy original too, and it contained 3 new units, 5 short campaigns spread over 27 missions, 3D animations and new audio tracks. Is it enough to save it? I doubt that, but the choice ultimately will be yours. Earth 2140 is a Polish post-apocalyptic themed futuristic real-time strategy, and a pretty decent RTS at that, if you like those, that is. I don't. But I'll try to stay as objective as I'll manage to. So, in the year 2140, Earth is in ruin. On a side note, going by what's currently happening in real world, I deem it to be very plausible future. It was partly caused by numerous environmental catastrophes, partly because of the countless wars we've waged over the years. The reason, however, is really irrelevant. Point is, Earth is a shadow, a shell of its former self, and the remaining humans gathered up, joined into 2 factions and moved underground, where it was still safe to live. So you could kinda say that all humans are mole people in 2140. Anyway, there are the United Civilized States and Eurasian Dynasty factions, both fighting for whatever the scraps of remaining usable land there still is. Earth 2140 features 2 campaigns, one for each side, and you'll be pleasantly surprised with variety of missions that they offer. Cause while the general formula of mining resources, erecting structures, then building units and sending them to battle still apply here, some missions have very creative and, dare I say it, fun objectives. There's over 30 of these missions, each side has around 10 types of buildings and 30 kinds of units, and they're all different and unique to their side. Oh, and some of the units are huge mechs, which are always fun to see in action, regardless of the type and genre of the game in question. What Earth 2140 was best known for, however, other than the graphics, which I'll get to in a moment, is its difficulty, which is astronomical. I mean, not only because the game is rather fast and doesn't wait for sleepy or neurotic gamers to catch up, but also because of AI being pretty smart. They will often attack from few flanks at once or try to pull you into a trap. It's not unusual to be as pleasantly surprised by their tactical choice as terrified of how well they're pulling it off. Presentation-wise, Earth 2140 is, or was, fantastic. The units are clearly distinguishable, uniquely looking and behaving, all very nicely and smoothly animated, regardless if they're moving, attacking or idling. The shots and explosions are well telegraphed too, and it's not uncommon to have parts of the screen entirely covered in fire and smoke during some of those larger combat encounters. Sounds are good too, with all weapons and units having their own high-quality clickety-clackety sounds and explosions sounding appropriately bassy. If you like RTSs, this one's definitely not to skip. I feel that sharer RTS game Future Wars, which I've not played myself for that matter, was made only to prove that a single person could pull off a Command & Conquer. And one Chris Jones did just that. He did, pulled it off, and it's surprisingly well done from what I've managed to gather about it. I mean, sure, it looks like something that you found stuck to the sole of your shoe after a long hike, but today, in 2024, when indies are some of the most innovative and popular games, we know better than to judge a game just by its presentation, even if it's rather terrible. So, Future Conflict is just that. A future conflict, and it's between a nondescript government and the rebels that want to overthrow it, and it spans 11 missions long campaign. Not much perhaps, but once again, other than the maps and voiceovers, it was made by a single fellow. So, I'm sure that by what you've seen so far, it's not a surprise anymore, but it's a near verbatim clone of the first Command & Conquer, working identically. The building, erecting and unit production is identical, and even the units themselves are in the very same classes as in the original. So riflemen, grenadiers, missile soldiers, jeeps, tanks, artillery and helicopters. If you're familiar with Westwood's classic, Future Conflict will not be a surprise mechanically is what I'm saying here, for better or worse. While the campaign is not very long, let's not kid ourselves, Future Conflict, same as most other RTSs, other than to prove that it can be done, was made for multiplayer. And it does offer a small selection of interesting skirmish maps, 2-player online multiplayer, or 4-player mode against bots, and ability to create your own missions and scenarios in the map editor, which was included with the registered copy of the game. Unit editor is added too, but since I've not had a chance to play Future Conflict myself, I can't really vouch for the quality of either. And the resources online on usability of both of these tools are rather limited too. Still, they're a nice addition, and I'm sure all owners of the full release appreciated their inclusion. Future Conflict, being the only sharer game in today's video and a one-man effort, is definitely a game worth attention. So, if you're into the genre, you may be inclined to test it out of curiosity if nothing else. Even if RTSs are perhaps not my favorite genre, it was quite interesting working on the video, and I think I found a new appreciation for the games. While I won't be rushing to play them for any extended length of time, for many reasons really, I believe that my indifference is leaning a tiny bit towards the positive outlook on them now. So what do you think of them though? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked the video, hit those like and subscribe buttons below, and maybe share it too, it helps more than you know. If you didn't, then don't naturally. It was fun talking to you as usual, and I'll see you, or more accurately, talk to you very soon.
Our mission is a success.